Clark. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackay. That is noted. Any members present through the Skype call are reminded that the instant messaging will be visible on the webcast and should only be used to indicate their wish to speak. For those members in the chamber, please do turn off your microphones when you're finished speaking, or the sound quality for those on the Skype call will be affected, and indeed they may hear you muttering. We're not expecting a fire drill this evening, but if the fire alarm sounds during the meeting, please remain seated. And I'm pretty confident that Olivia will tell us if we need to take any action. First and foremost is item number 1 on the agenda, apologies. I'm not aware that we have any apologies, and I'm indicating that's the case. And therefore, item 2, there are no substitute members this evening. Item number 3, there are no urgent items on the agenda this evening. Item number 4 is the notification of visiting members. There are no physically present visiting members, but I am aware that Councillor Janetta Sams is present. Are there any other visiting members? And indeed, Councillor Sams, would you indicate which item you are here interested on?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm visiting member. Item 19, I reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sam. That is noted. Item number 5, which is disclosures by members and officers. Are there any disclosures by members or officers this evening? Nobody is indicating. Item number 6, disclosures of lobbying. Have any members been lobbied on any items which are on this evening's agenda? What I will do in that case, I'll ask Olivia to go around the room and to state which items you've been lobbied on.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, have you been lobbied?
Not specifically about anything on this agenda, but certainly for the October the 4th item, I have been.
Thank you. Councillor Clark.
Items relating to the local plan review.
Councillor Garton.
Yes, local plan, housing, land supply, just generally to do with all of that.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Grigg.
All items related to local plan.
Thank you. Councillor Mackay.
Well, like everybody else, I've been lobbied by on Pacific sites. Other than that, none.
Thank you. Councillor Mumford.
All items relating to the local plan.
Councillor Russell.
Items relating to the local plan review.
Thank you. Councillor Spooner. Thank you. Councillor Springett.
Items related to the local plan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, members. Item number 7 is to consider where any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I move that all items this evening be taken in public as proposed. Is this agreed? That is indeed agreed. Item number 8, minutes of the meeting which was held on the 8th of June 2021. Yeah, as I read that, I realised it was wrong. What was the correct date? Sorry, Olivia. The meeting held on the 6th of July, and that is indeed on pages 1 to 6 of your agenda packs. Do any of the, aside from the date, do any members of the committee have any comments on the accuracy of the minutes? No. In that case, I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of June be agreed as a correct record, and I shall sign them at the end of the meeting. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Item number 9 is presentation of petitions. There are no petitions this evening that I'm aware of. No, indeed. Item number 10 is question and answer session for members of the public. There are indeed no questions from members of the public this evening. Item number 11, questions from members to the chairman. There are no questions from members to the chairman this evening. Item number 12 is the committee work programme, which is pages 7 to 9 on your agenda packs. Do any officers or members of the committee have any comments on the work programme? No?
I'd like to add an item for 12th of October, Chair, if I may, which is an update on the Medway Street Underpass flood prevention works.
Thank you very much. That's noted, and we will add that to the work programme and therefore the agenda. And I move that the work programme be noted if nobody else has any comments, which I don't believe they do. What I propose to do, if it is with the indulgence of the committee, is that we take item number 19 as the first item on the agenda. And I do that because, really to save time, because Peter Cooling is here to speak on that item. So item number 19 is the local plan review update, which is pages 118 to 120 in your agenda packs. First and foremost, is everybody in the committee happy for me to take that as the next item on the agenda? I take that as a yes. Prior to the report's introduction, Councillor Peter Cooling will address the committee on behalf of the coordinating team of Maidstone Calc. Mr. Cooling, you have up to 3 minutes to speak, please.
Thank you very much. I am speaking for the coordinating team. The SPI committee met on 8th of June, 6th of July, and now 21st of September, with each agenda including a local plan review update. On 8th of June, that update included quotations. Once the Regulation 19 documents are subject to publication, those with an interest in the borough will have the opportunity to consider whether they believe the documents are sound and legally compliant. This will provide Maidstone Borough Council important information that seeks to proceed to submission, end quotes. On 6th of July, the update included in essence the same words and also a revised timetable that slipped targeted adoption by 3 months. The minutes of that meeting include, quotes, the committee sought assurances from officers that the new LDS timetable would be met, and this was confirmed subject to no unforeseen events occurring, end quotes. In the agenda pack for tonight's meeting, you are told, quotes, the Regulation 19 consultation will be on the draft for submission version of the documents. These documents are the documents that the authority intend to subsequently submit to the Secretary of State. The report on the documents is on course to be brought to this committee on 4th October and then to full council on 6th October, end quote. You may have noted the subtle change of language when describing the Reg 19 procedure. On 8th of June, it was consultation on documents before seeking to proceed to submission, while this evening it is heralded as the draft being the intended submission. And this is with a 2 days gap between your next meeting to agree the draft for submission and the full council, at which presumably approval will be sought to launch consultation, with the latest LDS opening up a 3 months gap between eventual adoption of this review and expiry of the current plan. We do encourage this committee, please, to 1, seek confirmation whether the draft for submission will be subject to updating after the imminent consultation. 2, discuss whether the 2 days gap between your next meeting and the extraordinary council will give sufficient time to absorb and review documentation before recommending it to full council, noting that it will preclude you making any changes unless you issue a significant, indigestible, urgent update to council. 3, discuss whether preparations are overcautious, as this consultation will garner 1,000 or 2 responses, many of which will repeat each other and repeat what was said at Reg 18B, and which will then be used as a reason for delaying Reg 19 submission to the Secretary of State. 4, seek confirmation that the current LDS will be accelerated to remove the gap between expiration of validity of the current local plan and the eventual adoption of this review. And finally, clarify who prepares and advises on the contents of this review and who decides. That is, clarify this committee's responsibility and its ability to discharge it. And thank you for taking this early.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cooling, and I have to say you used your 3 minutes to the exact second, so thank you very much. The report is now going to be introduced by Mark Edgerton, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, committee. So, As we have noted, we are working to the timetable set out in the approved local development scheme, July 2021. And this document provides for a local plan review consultation under Regulation 19, the next key stage, from October this year, from the end of next month. Significant progress has been made on the local plan review, and the Regulation 19 consultation is on course to take place as planned. And it will be on the draft for submission version. So this is a statement contained within government regulation. It isn't something that officers are sort of label officers are providing. What it actually means is that Regulation 19 is a statutory consultation. It lasts for a minimum of 6 weeks, but it is, according to the regulations on that dictate this, which is the Town and Country Planning, Local Planning England Regulations 2012 as amended, it is defined as the draft for submission version. And it is indeed the version which, subject to consideration of the committee and any further modifications, which will be submitted to the Secretary of State, to be the version of the document that is indeed submitted to the Secretary of State. Now, it was for the housing communities and local government. It is now for levelling up communities and local government, per the recent government announcement. Now, what we also have, in addition to the main Regulation 19 documents, is a new suite of evidence which is going to support those documents. Some of the evidence is, of course, already published. It was published, for example, with the Regulation 18 preferred approaches. There'll be other evidence as well, which is already in the public domain. So we've got an updated suite of evidence, and this includes detailed technical studies and updates to existing studies post-COVID and post-Brexit. The evidence also includes a matter which I know is close to members' hearts, which is the statements of common ground with other authorities and other key bodies. And just to finally note that we will be seeing the full report and documents on the 4th of October at this committee, and then on to full council on the 6th of October. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mark. Just before I come to visiting members, I just want to note, pretty much to add to what Mark has said, relating to the statements of common ground. Now, there is a protocol that has been previously decided by this committee that the statements of common ground would remain on yellow pages and not be published in advance. However, I've discussed this with the Vice Chairman and with Councillor Grigg earlier on today. I don't think, and I think there is a general feeling that it would not be helpful for the meeting which discusses the local plan review to go into closed session. So on that basis, I would like to gain the permission of this committee for those to be published as part of that evidence base, so that this committee does not have to go into closed session on the 4th of October. I'll park that for a moment, if perhaps that can be something that we discuss, but I do understand that there are visiting members, and the protocol is that I should come to them first. So, Councillor Sams, as a visiting member, do you have anything which you wish to speak first?
Thank you, Chairman. No, only to say that what you've just said about the yellow papers, I think is a good way forward and shows transparency, and I'm hoping that the members will agree with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Grigg. So first to speak, I have Councillor Val Springett. If I can just sort of add what I've said to make it into a proposal, essentially, that we do bring those statements of common ground to the committee on the 4th of October as public information. First to speak, I've got Councillor Mrs. Springett and then Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Chair. When we discussed this, I felt that yellow pages just create suspicion and mistrust amongst the public. And I don't like yellow pages, and they should only ever be used when it's really essential. So I understand that the draft statements of common ground will be published with the agenda on Friday, but they are still being updated and revised, so they are draft, but they will be in the public domain rather than kept out of the public domain at this stage. So I would second your proposal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Springett. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to know from Mr. Edgerton or Mr. Coyne whether they would have any comments from the council's point of view as to the proposed move.
Thank you very much. In actual fact, I have just, as you started speaking, I was informed that Angela Woodhouse would like to speak on this, so perhaps your questions might be answered. Angela Woodhouse, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, members, I'm sure you will all be aware that the Constitution actually sets out a process with regard to exempt papers, and I am actually the proper officer in terms of determining whether a paper should be in Part 2 or not at the point of agenda publication. And as also the person with responsibility for FOIs and EIR, so those regulations. Currently, that statement is considered an exempt paper or in Part 2, and we wouldn't release it if we had an EIR request, for example. So I would need to have clear evidence as to why it is now a public document before I would be happy to publish it as a public document. And it's not saying we can't waive that, because there are circumstances in the past where we have had documents that have been Part 2, but we have waived our right to keep it in Part 2 because we believe the public interest test has applied and it would be more appropriate. But there is a process we go through to do that. What I will say is that's a process I go through, and I will take advice from other officers as well when I go through that. When it then comes to committee, it's in effect there's another stage where you as committee can review that document and say, okay, even though it's exempt and in Part 2 we want to consider it in public. So I'm not sure that you can make that decision tonight. I don't think that's appropriate, but I do understand what you're saying, and I hear your wishes in terms of being as transparent as possible, but I would like the proper process to be followed. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Angela. I'm going to go back to Councillor Mackay, who asked the question, and then I will come to you, Councillor Springett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for coming back to me. The response from the officers does not surprise me one little bit. I would like us to proceed with your proposal.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. I still believe that they should be published, but if there is a technical reason why they cannot be published this Friday, there would possibly be the option, if they can't, I would like them to be, but if they can't, because we can't get through the official process to do it, could it be considered they were yellow pages that aren't published in the agenda Friday, but that on the 4th of October we could decide to discuss them in public? I don't know whether that would work. It's just a thought, because I would like to see them in public. I think yellow pages creates, as I said, distrust and suspicion.
Thank you, Councillor Springett. I do hear what you're saying, and I'm particularly keen that if we possibly can to bring them, I don't see any reason why we couldn't go ahead with a resolution this evening. If we are told that we are acting outside of the law, then obviously we will have to reconsider. But nonetheless, I think to get the strength of this committee, the strength of this committee's feeling is nonetheless very important. Councillor Clark, I have you to speak next, and then Councillor Garson.
I'm concerned that this could be a heavy-handed proposal. Given the advice from officers, I don't see any evidence that's under review to make this decision tonight. And I also feel that going forward, we always have the ability as a committee to look at the papers and consider how we will approach them, depending on the content and the advice from officers. So I'm not sure this is the right thing to do this evening.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, Councillor Garson, I have the legal officer Russell Fitzpatrick who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Chair. My point is simply this, that obviously Angela hasn't had an opportunity to review that documentation yet. We're still in the process of finalising the committee report. So perhaps that if you were going to go down that route, that there is some form of caveat inserted into the recommendation rather than a it will resolution, if that makes sense.
Thank you for that, Russell. I would be happy with the committee's approval to adjust the proposal so that it is based on that advice from Angela, but nonetheless I do think it is important that we carry the strength of feeling of this committee, who did indeed create the protocol in the first place. Next to speak, I have Councillor Garton.
Mr. Chairman, I really wanted to talk about what Mr. Cooling was addressing the committee for. However, conversation went on since that point, so maybe I could make 2 points, if you would allow me. I'm quite concerned about what Ms. Woodhouse said, that there needs to be clear evidence whether it is in the public interest to make a document public. I thought the strength was the other way around. We have to have clear evidence to make it not public. So if the legal officer or Ms. Woodhouse herself could assure this committee that the burden of proof is the other way around than she actually said this evening.
Thank you very much for that, Patrick. Angela or Russell, are you able to come back on that?
Yeah, apologies if I misspoke. Yep, you're right. It is about in favour of disclosure, and particularly like when you apply EIR regulations, it's always in favour of disclosure. And when we do apply the public interest test, we weigh up the reasons for exemption versus why we should disclose, and it is in favour of disclosure, so that is correct. I completely understand and hear the committee's feelings with regard to transparency, and that is something we endeavour to do, and I will take that into account, and I will talk to strategic planning team as well about why the document may have changed in its nature. As I understood it previously, it has always been in Part 2 because it's draft and it's under development and it's with other authorities. So it's not just our business affairs, it's other people's business affairs we would be putting into the public domain. So we'd probably need to seek some kind of agreement. But as I haven't had prior conversations with strategic planning or discussions on this, I'm unable to give a clear opinion tonight, but I will review all the evidence when I get it. Sorry.
Thank you for that, Angela. Phil Coyne, would you like to say something? I will come to you, Councillor Mumford, but in a moment.
Just to say, Chair, that I think probably, as you've suggested, if the committee sort of indicates its preference, and then we will talk with Angela and with Ryan tomorrow in terms of the rules around the protocol, and we can then sort of email out to members what the outcome of that is.
I'm quite content with that at the moment. Next to speak, I've got Councillor Mumford, and then Councillor Clark, and are you and then Councillor Mrs. Springett, and then Councillor Garton again.
Yeah, like the other members, I want to be as transparent as we can be, and I'd like to support your proposal as long as you amend with what the legal officer has suggested. My concern here is people gathering evidence for a JR, and as soon as we deviate from the correct policy procedure, that starts compiling evidence for a JR, which a lot of people would love to take us on. So I think we need to be uppermost in our mind that we follow procedure.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mumford. Next, Councillor Clark.
I mean, I think Councillor Mumford's point is good. I think we should amend this to essentially, I think everyone on this committee will be very happy to be as transparent as we possibly can, but there will be times when it will affect the residents of Maidstone if we get into a JR. So I think we still have to be very careful about the advice that comes from officers. We still have the ability to choose how we take that advice in any case on a case-by-case basis. But I just don't think that we can go forward and say nothing will be on yellow pages. I just think that we could actually cause more suffering to the residents of Maidstone if we get into a JR and we lose funds that way. So if this proposal can be something along the lines of this committee agrees to be as transparent as possible, subject to legal arguments from officers, which can be reviewed on a case-by-case basis by the committee, I'd be happy to support it. But I just think that to use a wide brush on something so potentially litigious is a big risk.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. I'm not prepared to adjust my initial proposal to that extent. We have sought advice and we have had discussions with Mark and Phil and Rob on this subject. So it isn't something that's wholly new. Councillor Springett.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest that we keep the wording in your proposal, but put in subject to approval by the proper officer and the legal officer. So it gives it a caveat that if they say, actually, we're not happy because it exposes us, blah, 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 then that's the reason. So I would propose we keep that wording, but just put that wording is subject to the approval by the proper officer and legal officer. I would put both in there.
I'm quite happy with that approach. Councillor Garson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, as I said earlier on, I wanted to actually talk about something completely different, or partially different, about Councillor Cooling's comments he made earlier on. He's very concerned about the timeline. I think members of this committee have been concerned all along, and so have officers, and we find ourselves rather between a rock and a hard place, because we have to have a 5-year plan. Soon we'll probably have a 2-year plan, and then a 1-year plan, and then a 3-month plan. The timelines are getting shorter and shorter, dictated to us by central government. We used to have a 10-year plan at one point. So when he asks, is 2 days between committee and full council sufficient? I would say clearly it is not, but we've got to struggle as well as we can. So the message I like to give tonight, or to the officers and to us as members as well, is we just have to learn from the mistakes and the problems we had this time to do it better next time around. I think that's all. And to the public, we can only say we are trying the best we can, and so do our officers.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Garson. Other people may wish to speak. However, I think we've started to move on slightly from the proposal I've made, which is absolutely fine. But perhaps if I could close this little avenue of conversation, and then any other points which need to be made. Specifically on the proposal which I made from the chair, I can see that Councillor Mackay and Councillor Grigg are both indicating to speak. Does anybody else have any points they wish to make on that particular point before we go to the vote? No? So Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Grigg, then Councillor Russell.
I'll make this very brief. That we all around here wish to see, or do not wish to see, yellow papers. When I asked to hear the officer's response, Angela Woodhouse made it very clear that if we voted to release the yellow papers, she would block it. And she would review that decision and discuss how the committee's view could be met. Now, that's what I think we should do. We should, as Strategic Planning and Infrastructure, make a clear statement that we wish to see these yellow papers in the public domain. That's what I would prefer to see the headlines in the papers tomorrow, not some wishy-washy. We would like to see them if teacher allows, if teacher permits, if officers allow. Come on. Do what you say you want to do. Stop being wishy-washy.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mackay. Angela Woodhouse, would you like to come in?
Apologies, Chairman. That isn't what I said, so I just felt I needed to clarify. What I've said to you is there is a two-stage process that we go through when we consider exempt items before we publish them. There's a process I go through as a proper officer, and then there's a process, as explained, and I know other councillors have said this, when it comes to you at committee, there's a second process where you review what's in front of you, and you have to make the decision on whether you take it in public or in Part T. I did not say I was here to block what the committee want to do. I was just trying to explain to you there is a process, and that was it. So I do dispute what's just been said. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Angela. Next to speak, I've got Councillor Grigg.
Thank you. I actually would like to second Councillor Springett's proposal, which is with the wording that we go forward with the amendment, yeah.
No, that's absolutely fine. And Councillor Russell.
Surely Angela was just saying that she hasn't actually seen what we're talking about, so she hasn't got to the point where we've gone through the process. It's not that she won't go through the process, it's just we haven't got there yet. And I was just asking a quick question of, could you just read out the full thing that we're going to vote on? Sorry.
Yeah, I certainly will. Does anyone else wish to speak on this before we do move to a vote? No, fine. So my understanding is, I mean, my proposal was that we do bring the current statements of common ground to committee on the 4th of October as public papers, which was seconded by Councillor Springett. I mean, I'm happy to do that with the caveat that obviously if we are acting in a way that we're not allowed to, then obviously that would have to be changed regardless of our view. But certainly the spirit of the proposal is to show that actually I don't think it is appropriate for this meeting to go into yellow pages, into private session, and I don't think the public would thank us. So that my proposal is that we bring the current statements of common ground, which are working documents, to this committee on the 4th of October. And that was seconded by Councillor Springett. And then amended.
Yes, with the wording subject to approval by the proper officer
Subject to approval by the
legal officer.
Yep,
So
apologies.
it's your original wording with that caveat added, which will give us a protection, hopefully, that Councillor Munford was referring to and cover the concerns of Councillor Clark, that we need to be cautious.
Yeah.
So I think that's a sensible route.
No, I think that's in the spirit of what was proposed as well. Do we all agree? Yeah. Okay. All of those in favour, could you raise your hand, please? Of the amendment, yes, apologies. All those in favour of the amendment? All those against? And any abstentions? Then that amended is carried. Thank you very much. Right, so we move on from that bit. Does anybody else have anything they wish to add to in relation to what Councillor Cooling said or what Mark Edgerton said before we move on? No, well, thank you very much. So this report is for noting. So therefore, is that report noted, members? Thank you very much. We now move back to item number. Apologies, my pages are out of sync now. We now move back to item number 13, which is reports of outside bodies, which is on pages 10 to 12 of your agenda pack. This report has been prepared by Councillor Patrick Garton as the Council's representative to the Kent Downs Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Joint Advisory Committee. Councillor Garton, do you wish to speak on the report that you have presented?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that members did read the report, unless there are further questions. we can take it as read.
Does anybody have any questions on this report? No? I move that this report be noted in that case. Move on to item number 14, which is the autumn neighbourhood plan for Regulation 19, which is pages 13 to 20 in your agenda packs. And this report is presented by Anna Ironmonger. It will be introduced by Anna, who is in attendance virtually, I understand. Thank you. Anna?
Yes. Good evening, Chair, and good evening, members. The Autumn Neighbourhood Plan was subject to examination, and the examiner's report was received on the 4th of March 2021. The post-examination version of the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan, which can be found as background document 1 to your report this evening, was subject to local referendum on the 8th of July. The referendum was successful, with 98.8% voting in favour of the neighbourhood plan. The results were published on the Council's website. Following a successful referendum, a neighbourhood plan becomes part of the development plan for the borough. The Maidstone Development Plan consists of 6 neighbourhood plans, and the successful referendum of the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan takes this number to 7. The next stage is to formally make the neighbourhood plan. In line with legislation, where a referendum is successful and more than half of those who vote in favour of a neighbourhood plan, the plan must be made by the Council within 8 weeks. On this occasion, the statutory duty will not be met owing to the fact that this is the first opportunity for this report to be considered by committee. Paragraph 11 of the report sets out that the Council has a statutory duty to make the plan following successful referendum unless members consider there are new matters in relation to the EU obligation or any of the Convention rights that were not raised by the independent examiner who examined the plan. As such, this committee is asked to note the result of the referendum and make a recommendation to full council that the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan, as set out in the post-examination Autumn Neighbourhood Plan at background document 1, is made. Thank you, and invite any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Anna. Does anybody have any questions on this? No. In that case, so there are 2 recommendations. First and foremost, I move that the result of the referendum held on the 8th of July 2021 on the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan be noted. And recommendation 2 is that Council be recommended to make the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan. Do you wish to speak? Sorry, Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, I was going to second you on that. That's why I put my hand up.
Perfect.
And as being the seconder, I will take my right to speak. A parish council putting together a neighbourhood plan. They've been going now since 2012. It's massive. It's like us putting together a local plan. And we've got professional officers helping us. So I don't think we should let this pass without congratulating Autumn on achieving 98.8%. And they have now got, once it's made, they've got a neighbourhood plan, which I've been doing one, and it's a lot of effort. So, yeah, I'd like to second that and congratulate Autumn at getting this far.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mumford, and indeed I send my congratulations as well, and thank you for seconding that. Do we agree, therefore, that Council be recommended to make the Autumn Neighbourhood Plan? That is agreed. Thank you very much. Item 15 is the first quarter financial update and performance monitoring report of this financial year, which is on pages 21 to 41 of your agenda packs. This report is presented by Mark Green, and it says here Anna Collier, but I think, and indeed Anna, apologies, I can see you on the screen as well. I'm still getting used to some people being on the screen and others sitting next to me. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. This is the regular quarterly monitoring report for the first quarter of the current financial year. I'll say a few words about the financial part of it, and then, as the Chair has said, I'll hand over to Anna for the KPIs. it's still relatively early in the financial year so far as reporting is concerned. You can see the key variances on page 35 of your agenda papers. At this stage, we're doing a bit better than budgeted on planning fees, not as well as expected on parking income, and the two things net out to provide a small underspend, and that's the projection for the remainder of this year. So no big surprises so far as the financials are concerned this year. And I'll now hand over to Anna to talk about the KPIs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, and good evening, members. The Q1 performance report can be found on pages 39 to 41 of your agenda pack. As you can see from the report, just one of the 6 indicators for this committee missed its target. That indicator was the percentage of priority 2 planning enforcement cases which were dealt with within time, and that achieved an outturn of 73.79% against a target of 90%, therefore missing its target by more than 10%. Performance has declined since Q4 for this indicator for last year. The team started off the quarter understaffed but had 2 new officers join them in May, which should now help tackle the amount of open applications that they have. The graph on the second page of the report shows how the team's workload has increased over the last 12 months for interest and committees noting. Good performance was seen in the remainder of the KPIs that we reported this quarter, and at the time of presenting last quarter's report to you, we were unable to receive figures for the net additional homes provided in 2020-21 and the affordable homes as a percentage of new homes. These figures are now available and shown on page 3 of the report, and as you can see, performance was good and both indicators achieved more than their annual targets. Happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much. Does anybody wish to speak or ask any questions on this report? Councillor Garson, please.
Well, I raised it virtually at every meeting or every opportunity at this committee whenever I have the chance. Priority 1 enforcement, and particularly priority 2 enforcement cases. I think having such a low below target figure is pretty much what we are all, most of us, I suppose, in the room are experiencing as members, that enforcement cases are just not being dealt with as swiftly as what our residents would like it to see. What exactly, when do we actually comply with the target? Just once the officer takes on the case, or once the officer visits the site? Because I've got certainly one site which has not been visited several months after the first complaint has been lodged. So, I mean, I can go on these targets and these tables, which is pure mathematics, but the feeling on the ground is certainly even more detrimental than what these figures seem to show.
Thank you very much. Rob Jarman.
Thank you, Chairman. As Anna Collier said, we've fairly recently taken on 2 members of staff in the enforcement team, one of those in a relatively senior position. And I'm pleased to say that if one looks at the period from the 1st of July to today, the performance on priority 2 enforcement cases has risen to 86%. So obviously, we've put in more resources and it's beginning to pay dividends. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any comments they wish to make? Councillor Mackay.
So, sorry, I think what Councillor Garton was referring to was, what is the target? What is the timescale? What meets, what gives us a tick?
Rob Jarman.
Sorry, I can provide that detail to this committee, perhaps outside of it. But in terms of enforcement cases, it's going to vary. I mean, some enforcement cases, we get a complaint, the officer visits the site, and it's either not development at all, requiring planning permission, or it's permitted development. So that's very straightforward. But for instance, on a Gypsy and Traveller site, it's often a different matter. There's often a need for multiple site visits.
Thank you. Councillor Garden.
Yeah, I mean, Councillor Mackay said it quite rightly in very simple terms, as my question tried to ask earlier as well. When do we get the tick? At the first site visit, once the case is closed, when is the tick actually happening?
So sorry, Councillor Garden, I wasn't clear enough. So in my case of there's a complaint, officer visits the site the next day, the day after the complaint, and sees that it's clearly not development requiring planning permission, then the tick is the second day. No, sorry, it can't need enforcement because it's not development requiring planning permission.
Yeah, but if it's a place which would... Your example showed there's a complaint, there's no breach, so obviously it's a tick as soon as it's been established that there's no breach. But once there is a breach, when do we actually get the tick?
Yeah, sorry, Councillor Garden. Yes, that was an example. When there is a breach, then it depends on the magnitude of that breach. Obviously, perhaps I'm being too straightforward about this. If there's major development, say in your patch, in the area of outstanding natural beauty, then that's a major breach, and we will look to take the strongest possible action. But with the strongest possible action, an injunction, then we're straight into court proceedings. We need permission from the court. So we wouldn't be closing the case. Yeah. In that extreme example, we serve an injunction. Probably the landowner will put in a planning application. Presumably, we would refuse it. Probably the landowner would then go to appeal. So we wouldn't be able to close down that case until the inspector, hopefully, backed up our original enforcement notice.
Councillor Garden.
So if I understand, the tick is actually being put on the paper once the case is closed. That is the very simple answer here, yeah?
Yes, but as I said, hopefully fairly extreme cases, we serve an enforcement notice, the landowner or the applicant appeals, the decision, if you like, is taken away from Maidstone Borough Council, it goes to the planning inspectorate. And we can only close down a case once the appeal decision has been made, or the remedial action.
Councillor Garden.
Maybe it's probably not a discussion for tonight, but maybe we should look at when we are applying the tick. The tick we should apply when the case goes out of Maidstone's hand. If it goes to the inspector or whatever to appeal, it is out of our hands, and we should actually give us the tick that we've done the target. The other thing is obviously, as you're saying, these cases can take months or even years. So if we are looking at a very low performance number here, that is obviously because we have a very long backlog and there's a lot of cases pending, and we cannot improve on that in a hurry, obviously. So again, my question, which I asked at this committee several times before, do you need more resources, Mr. Chairman?
Not at the moment, because we've got additional resources, which we're very thankful for. And so far, as I said, those officers are obviously making a positive impact. And we'll just have to, follow the data. Enforcement cases may have spiked. We need to, keep on following the data before I could answer that question. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob Jarman and Councillor Garton. Perhaps I appreciate that there seems to be a little bit of frustration at what the actual KPI is. So perhaps if we could take that offline, because I think that is something slightly different. Mark, do you have something to add to that?
Yes, I think it would probably be helpful if we could circulate the definition of the PI, and I'm happy to arrange that.
I think that might be helpful. Next to speak, I've got Councillor Springett and then Councillor Munford.
Thank you. I think I know where Councillor Mackay was sort of trying to go. It just says percentage of enforcement cases dealt with in time, but it doesn't specify what time is. So what I'd just like to say is that I appreciate that they have been under tremendous pressure. I'm very pleased we've got more staff and almost doubled our resources, so I'm hoping that things will improve. But I think from the in-time aspect from me, when we write to a person saying you are in breach and we would like to see a planning application done within 28 days, that on day 29, we're back on the case. Whereas I have examples in my patch where people have committed a breach and they've been given 28 days, and 3 months down the line, we've written back and said, oi, excuse me, we haven't seen that planning application yet. So for me, the in-time bit is in accordance with standard time schedules. So where we have we're giving someone 28 days, if we can, if staff can, I know they're busy, but on day 29, if it hasn't happened, I'd like to see a letter go out saying, we haven't seen that planning application yet and we gave you 28 days and it's day 29. So that's where I'm seeing the in time, so in accordance with a time schedule. Thank you.
Forgive me if I'm wrong. My understanding of this KPI was precisely that, and it's the percentage which are dealt with within that time frame. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Sorry, you're correct. I think what Councillor Garton and perhaps Councillor Springett are referring to is the definition of closing down a case. But I can, as you inferred, Chairman, I can provide more detail on that. It does very much depend on the type of breach.
I'm fairly confident that all members have probably got many specific breaches that perhaps we don't want to go into now.
Just very quickly, just to come back on that, just to say when it's, I think the KPI could refer to when it's closed down or passed to the next stage, potentially. So if the next stage is enforcement action or something, possibly the KPI could, that's something we could perhaps discuss away for this committee.
Yeah, that's something that perhaps you and I, as Chairman and Vice Chairman, could have a little bit more oversight of and bring back at some point. Rob?
Yeah, hopefully to close this down, Chairman, I think we have a meeting with your good self and the Vice Chairman coming up, and perhaps we could sort of agree what we want to communicate to the whole of SPI.
Yeah, no, I think
in terms of the data.
Indeed. Right, if we can move on from that. Councillor Mumford, I have you next.
Yeah, I'm sorry to disagree with everyone, but when you get the KPI sent round us, that will clarify the situation. My understanding is through this committee, we spent a long time with the matrix, and the matrix was what the KPI was based on, and we put the cases in priority 1, priority 2. Priority 1, the KPI is based on them visiting within 24 hours. Priority 2, it's a bit longer. And then you go down a path, and it is not really, the KPI can't go for when the case is closed, because there are so many delaying tactics, and even at the end of the day, we look at whether it's expedient for us to actually pursue it any further. So the KPI is based on the first visit when the case is opened or completely closed because there is no breach, it's permitted development or whatever. And last night, I know Val was there was a very good presentation by the planning team, the enforcement team. And if you look at the graph in front of you, the problem has been generated mainly by delaying tactics. But if you look, we're coming from just over 200 cases to 400 cases in a year. So the workload has doubled. They have got to visit every site to confirm it. And if in May we employed 2 more officers, you now see the graph going down. So, yeah, they have been through difficult times, but I think you're going to find that the KPI is when they visit, because it's then completely variable of how long it can take.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mumford. Next to speak, I've got Russell Fitzpatrick, then I will come to you, Councillor Clark.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. It was just something which Councillor Mumford alluded to, which last night there was training on enforcement given by James Bailey and some of the enforcement officers. And I know that they are in the process of releasing a dashboard which will give updates on cases themselves. So obviously you've got the KPI, which is kind of like a general, it's just kind of like a snapshot in time. But if you're looking for more detail, they are working on a dashboard which members are able to access.
Thank you very much for that, Russell. Next to speak, I've got Councillor Clark.
Thank you. I think one of the points in that enforcement training last night that I mentioned, and I think it's worth mentioning again, is the fact that I think there's a big gap between the perception of the public in terms of enforcement and the rules under which we are having to operate, which are national government rules. This figure here, it's a red flag, etc., etc. It could be green, and yet I think the public would think, oh, okay, that's really great. Enforcement is now green. That's fantastic. But what it would be to be green would be that we're managing all of the cases within a timely fashion. And for instance, we could have a number of planning applications that have gone through. They've been built completely different. They've got different finishes. The sizes are different to the planning application. And our officers are constrained by a policy which is to regularise that planning application and go back to the applicants and say to them, the way that this can be done under planning policy is for you to put in a new planning application. And I think that the public, when they think of enforcement, they think somebody put in a planning application for X, they built something completely different, where is the sanction? Where are you going to take action against that person for doing something that's not correct in terms of their planning application? And I think that there's an element of the emperor's clothes when it comes to looking at this table and looking at the way the enforcement is, because I don't think it matters whether this is red, amber or green as far as what this really means, because under national policy, enforcement is it's a process which is being absolutely castrated, for want of a better word. So I think that, you know, we can sort of position it, oh yes, we'd like to get that red into a green, but let's be under no illusion, when it becomes green, there's still a gap between what the public thinks of it as enforcement and the rules by which our planning officers work.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Does anybody else have anything they wish to say? Councillor Garton.
Yeah, just that Councillor Munford completely confused me this evening, because I just asked Mr. Jarman, when do we get the tick for the KPI? He says once the case is closed. Now you tell us the tick is once the site is visited. So you are obviously saying something completely different than what we were explained by Mr. Jarman. So I would like to have some clarification on that, please.
it does feel a little bit like we're going around in circles here, and I would like to move on. I will very quickly allow Councillor Mumford a word on that, but if we can try and move on from this, please.
Yeah, I did start by saying that that was my understanding, but we're going to clarify where the KPI starts and how it's measured. But if you look at the delay in tactics, the different variants that we're asking people to do, you cannot look at a closed case because some of them can go on for years, others a few days. So the only measurement you've got, the matrix came through this committee. The only point that you can measure the officers on is when they visit according to the matrix, and like I say, priority 1's 24 hours, and priority 2 is a few days, and I forget how many that is. But that will be clarified when they push out the matrix, whether I'm right or wrong. Yeah?
Yeah, that's what I said earlier on when I said it's not for us to discuss tonight, but we need to possibly readdress the meaning of the KPI.
Gentlemen, can we move on, please? Does anyone else have anything they wish to add in relation to this report? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, I move that this report be noted. We move on to item number 16, which is recovery and renewal actions, which is on pages 42 to 53 of your agenda packs. This is going to be presented by Angela Woodhouse, who is in attendance virtually. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. So, as many of you will be aware, the Council has been developing a plan for recovery and renewal from the COVID-19 pandemic, following the release of a significant amount of one-off funding from government. An action plan has been developed following briefings with councillors, service committee chairs and vice chairs, and several meetings of the Policy and Resources Committee. In July, Policy and Resources considered the draft plan for recovery and renewal and agreed that each service committee should consider those actions that fall within their terms of reference. Attached to Appendix A are the actions that fall within this committee's remit. The committee is asked to consider and comment on the actions proposed and raise any new actions for consideration by Policy and Resources to aid the borough's recovery and renewal programme. Detailed actions provided in Appendix A that fall within this committee's remit, and they respond to increased demand and more specifically relate to additional resource within the planning service to ensure issues with backlogs and increased volumes of work are overcome. So it quite neatly dovetails with the discussion you've just had regarding the key performance indicators. Being somewhat cheeky, the actions fall within the head of Planning's remit, who is also here this evening, so I'm hoping he will be able to answer any questions you may have on the actions proposed. Okay, thank you very much. Happy to take any questions as well.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? I have got Councillor Russell to speak.
Thank you. It was just an item of clarification. On the planning, heritage and landscape, is it a heritage officer and an arboricultural officer? Because in that second column it says on approval fixed term position, but I'm assuming they're positions as in there's going to be one of each. Thank you.
It's more a resource. Certainly for the heritage side, it's additional staff because, as I understand it, for a number of years now, there's been an appetite for certainly management plans in conservation areas, and in some cases sort of extending existing conservation areas, creating new ones as well. So the additional resource is needed for that type of work. On top of that, there's been very significant changes to the NPPF. I think I sent an email to councillors, and it's coming from the white paper. One of those is the government are basically trying to get much better designed places. And I see heritage as a sort of subset of good design. So what I'm trying to say, probably badly, is I think there's sort of additional pressures coming from the sort of conservation side and, you know, from the government agenda about creating beautiful places and buildings. And it's hard to work out exactly, just how much resource we need there, because there's overlap. On the tree side, it's similar to the discussions we've been having on enforcement, as well as sort of, dare I say, people building things without planning permission. Unfortunately, people have been chopping down quite a few protected trees over the last 18 months without any kind of permission. And that's put a lot of burden on a small team, where there are sort of like resilience problems. I wouldn't say that the money would go automatically to extra staffing. It might go towards better systems. A lot of, sorry, I'm going into detail here. A lot of the tree inquiries we get are from people just trying to find out whether or not so-and-so tree has a protection order on it. And, a lot of people want trees to be TPO'd. So it might be that what we do is we have better systems available. We digitalize our records so people can self-serve more, so that they can, if somebody moves into a new property, they can go on our website and they can find out whether or not the particular tree is a subject of a tree preservation order, which would free up time then for the tree officers to be getting on with the sort of field work, as it were.
Councillor, I must apologise. I did have you down to speak on the last item, and I didn't come to you, Councillor Russell, so I apologise for that. Carry on.
Oh no, I was just coming back on that. I was
of course.
saying that's fine, but I think to look for information, most of the time if people can ring someone, they will just ring someone rather than looking for it themselves. So I think personally I'd quite like to see that went towards a person for those roles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got Councillor Clark, then Councillor Mackay, then Councillor Springett.
Thank you. I do have a question actually to officers about the planning development control. There's mention there about the third hire applications under the current, obviously the sort of post-COVID world. I'd be curious, and I don't doubt that at all. I think that's going to continue as well. So I have no concern about increasing resources where they're clearly needed. But I would be interested to know how that will affect revenues, given it's a third hire, that potentially could be an ongoing third hire. That would clearly offset the cost of that resource.
Yes, there's a sort of positive variance of around about 100, Mark can correct me, about £150,000. So that's, in straightforward terms, that's more income on the householder type applications, the smaller applications, house extensions typically, compared to estimate for this year. And yes, because as you said, Councillor Clark, because obviously that has resulted in more applications, so more pressure on staff. We've recruited people on fixed-term contracts.
Thank you very much. Next to speak, I have Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I assume what Councillor Russell, sorry, I missed the first part of your question, was referring to was Appendix A, 2.13, where these are actions assigned to this committee. And 2.13 says the third action, Heritage and Landscape Services, the proposal for 2 additional fixed-term posts. Seems quite reasonable to me, and I think Mr. Jarman outlined the need for these, but then talked about using the money to improve systems. I can't see that here. But what I do wonder is, what the hell has this got to do with COVID? I mean, people were chopping down trees before COVID and they continue to chop them down during COVID. Well, you know, I mean, we seems like we've got some money sloshing around, so let's find a way to use it sensibly. You know, but come on. It's a bit of a stretch, this one, to put it under the COVID bandwagon. That's point one for Mr. Jarman possibly to respond or not respond. But one area that doesn't come within our remit is on 2.9, where we're spending money and we will continue to spend money. And it's talking about making the best use of homeless prevention grant to enable households to remain in their homes. I have two questions on that. One, when does the homeless prevention grant is it expected to finish? What do we do when it does finish? And does this grant include the provision for the street homeless, rough sleepers, which disappeared once COVID came because councils received a grant to house them?
Thank you. Rob Jarman?
I can't answer the homeless question, but all I can say, Councillor Mackay, is particularly in the first 12 months of COVID, there was a similar trend to general enforcement with the volumes of, perhaps, I'm no expert on these things, perhaps because many people were in furlough, they were getting out into their local area and they were observing things more.
Thank you. Angela Woodhouse or Anna Collier, are either of you able to answer the question related to the homeless prevention grant at all?
No, Chairman, I wish I could. I will take that away and I'll provide an answer to the committee by email.
That would be very useful. However, Mark Green has just indicated he may have an answer, so thank you.
Yes, I think so far as the specific question you asked, Councillor Mackay, about when the grant is coming to an end, the grant's ongoing, and the pattern over the past few years is that the government has continued to support homeless prevention initiatives and initiatives to help rough sleepers, but we can't be confident that that will continue forever. So this is about building a bit of capacity in the system so that, when the grant, or if the grant is no longer there, then the council is able to manage homelessness itself.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mackay, would you like to come back on that?
Just so, what does building resilience mean? You get a grant for a fixed number of years, it stops. What does resilience mean? You mean you've saved some money out of the pot, or you built some homes?
I'm going to answer on Mark Green's behalf, but I think building resilience is so that putting the council in the position so that if that grant does stop, we can at least prevent people becoming homeless, albeit not using that grant, perhaps using our own funds or preventing the problem in the first place. That would be my understanding, and I'm getting nods of agreement round here. And Rob Jarman, would you like to answer?
Yeah, when I was talking about resilience, if one looks at the number of tree officers we've got, it's less than 2. So if one of them goes on holidays or one of them's ill, you're down to the bare bones, so to speak.
Thank you very much. Next to speak, I have Councillor Mrs. Springett.
Thank you. I'm pleased with these recovery actions, actually. The planning system overall has been struggling for a while, and I know that our tree officers absolutely are inundated. So actually, I don't care which fund it comes from, but I would very much welcome another heritage officer and another tree officer so that we can catch up, because at the moment they're running and we're still sort of behind the game. Just a very quick point on your comment on people tend to phone up to try, they can't find a tree has a TPO on it. It is a bit of a long-winded process to find it on our website, so I wonder whether consideration could be given to perhaps on the front page where we've got this how to get a new bin and how to do this, we could how to find have an easier link through potentially, because it does, I have to talk people through it sometimes, it's not easy.
Yeah, that's the kind of sort of system I was talking about. Yeah, some of it's, as you were alluding to, just representing things.
Thank you very much. If nobody else wishes to speak, then, and I can see no indications, I move that this report be noted. Thank you very much. In that case, we move on to item number 17, which is the Housing Land Supply Position 2020, which is pages 54 to 110 of your agenda packs, which is presented virtually by Helen Garnett. Helen, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. The report brought before you sets out the Council's current position in relation to the housing land supply and completions. So the report sets out a positive picture for delivery in the year 2021. We completed 1,354 dwellings across the borough. This strong delivery follows on from a good performance in the preceding years, and consequently the Council has managed to meet its previous undersupply of 206 dwellings in full. Overall, delivery has been similar to previous years, but there has been a small sort of shift in the delivery of small sites. That's dropped a little bit, and it is understood or thought that that might be related to the sort of events of the past year and the COVID pandemic. It should be noted that the DLHC, that's formerly the MHCLG, amended the housing delivery test nationally for the year 2021, and this effectively reduced the Council's yearly target by 361 dwellings. This was a one-off move in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the potential for the pandemic to have an effect on completions. However, Maidstone in the year 2021 saw an uplift in completions following the first lockdown, and consequently the housing delivery test results is projected to be 166% based on the amended housing delivery test. The report also sets out the Council's 5-year housing land supply and provides some background on the methodology for establishing build-out rates, including market context that we obtained from the Agents Forum. For 2020-2021, the Council remained in a robust position, having a 5.6-year housing land supply. Owing to the ongoing labour and materials sort of constraints that are happening, there remains some degree of uncertainty in the market and the ability for developers to deliver completions at the rate they've seen in previous years. So this is something that we will continue to monitor. The report is accompanied by appendices, and these set out the completions, detailed housing land supply and the analysis paper. The report's for noting only, and following this committee, the appendices will be published on the Council's website. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. Does anybody have anything they wish to comment on this report? No?
Just as long as that supply remains above 5 years, I'm a happy bunny. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, me too. If nobody has anything to comment on that, I move that this report be noted. Thank you very much. Which then makes item number 18 the final item on this agenda, as we've already taken item number 19 in advance. Item 18 is the Maidstone Design and Sustainability Development Plan document, which is pages 111 to 117 in your agenda packs. And this report will be introduced by Phil Coyne.
Thank you, Chair. I think members will be aware that there have been a lot of background discussions in terms of the the non-spatial planning policy basis of the Council's planning policy framework. Of particular concern to members has been the strength and depth of these policies in day-to-day development management decision-making, but also in our ability then to defend appeals against refusals for planning consent. As a response to these concerns, I think members will probably be aware that in June of this year, the Policy and Resources Committee made a sum of £140,000 available to this committee to prepare a development plan document to focus on some of these non-spatial policies that were the area of concern. The particular concern of members was around the quality of design that the Council was able to negotiate on the back of its policies, and equally the levels of sustainability and biodiversity that we were able to achieve as part of developments. So for this reason, what the report proposes is that a development plan document be prepared that will be entitled Design and Sustainability. Importantly, in order to try and, given that this will be a significant sum of money that will be spent on the preparation of the documents, in order to give it the maximum shelf life so that we get the most value for money out of it, it's been proposed in here that we focus on those areas that are least likely to be impacted by national changes to either sort of planning policy, building policy, environmental policy, etc. Members will know that the DPD, the benefit of a development plan document is that when it's prepared, it gains the same weight in policy terms as the local plan. The consequence of this, of course, is that it takes some time to prepare and goes through exactly the same procedure as the local plan in terms of an evidence base, in terms of consultation exercises, in terms of examination. Because this is such a significant piece of work, and because of the volume of work that's being undertaken within the spatial planning team at the moment, it's proposed that the work will be commissioned out to a multidisciplinary consultancy, a lot of whom will have sort of people on the books, as it were, that will be able to sort of work on the evidence base, and we think that will be better value for money than the council going out and commissioning different bits of the evidence base independently. Again, because it's such a big piece of work and because it's a relatively different piece of work, we propose to ensure that sort of value for money and that we get the best document that we possibly can. We will put this through a two-stage tender process whereby we start out with a series of non-prejudicial discussions with potential consultants, and it's noted in the report for that purpose that it may be that we revise the scope of the brief ever so slightly in the context of that. In terms of timescales, we started out aiming for sort of early to mid 2024 for adoption, but again we will need to review these when we've had discussions with potential contractors and we see sort of how long that will take and how we manage cost variations depending on time. The successful consultant will be responsible for the entire DPD and the evidence base, but importantly, the statutory consultations will be managed by the council, so they will come back to this committee in the normal way that we do to get the committee's approval to consult on draft documents. So that's the process that we are proposing. I won't sort of go exhaustively through the list of things that we're proposing at this level to include, but happy to take questions from members, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Phil. Just before I move on to members' questions, obviously this is something that has had some discussion on with including the Chair and Vice Chair of Planning Committee. What I would like to propose in addition to the recommendation which is laid out in this report is that obviously we have a selection on I think, paragraph 2.7, the bullet points in the middle of page 115 of areas that we would like to focus on. I would like to propose that we open that up at the relevant stage to members of the Planning Committee and members of the full Council to a workshop so that we can work through the areas in design and sustainability which members of this Council and the Planning Committee feel are most important to be considered and that should go forwards into a design and sustainability document. And my reason for that is that if we are going to have a design and sustainability document, there is very little point having something which design consultants or indeed officers in this council feel is appropriate, but not necessarily members of this council who are elected by members of the public for whom design and sustainability will have a lasting impact. So that's the proposal I have on the table. First to speak, I've got Councillor Springett, and then I've got Councillor Russell.
Sorry, me again. I was just going to virtually suggest what you just suggested, in that this is such a big subject. And I know poor Steve, whenever he's on planning, is tearing his hair out because we haven't got the particular policy to support strengthening a planning application. So yes, I was actually going to say, could we, once we've got the consultants and they've been given an outline, at some stage in the process, perhaps when they've done their initial work, could we have a workshop? Yes, probably with planning committee or some, members from planning committee and SBI. I think that would be really good. That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Phil.
Yeah, I think I'd very much welcome that, Chair, and I think it might even be worth at the very outset of the process, because when we have our initial discussions with consultants to sort of refine the brief, I think it will be good to run a workshop with members to actually look at that refined brief so that everybody's comfortable with it before we actually let the contract and start the work.
Yeah, on that basis, my proposal would be that we hold those workshops before we commit to the work. I've got Councillor Russell and then Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, it was just a quick point. When you go out to tender, can you stress that it could be a user-friendly document? When you send things out to consultants, and especially if they have lovely price tags, there's the danger that it could get back a whole load of waffle. It needs to be a document that can actually be used and easy to be used, because obviously it will now be an additional document. So something that planning committee, user-friendly, reader-friendly, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a very sage point. Phil.
I will insist that I can understand it, Chair. That will keep it simple.
Well, but Phil, the rest of us mere mortals must understand it as well. Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I remember some time ago, before this committee, came a proposal from officers that we adopt minimum standards for things like bedrooms and bathrooms and lots of other things. This was particularly relevant to social housing. Will that sort of thing be included in this? I can't see it. Unfortunately, this committee rejected those proposals. But I do know in the private sector, houses can be built with 3 bedrooms. And when it comes to social housing, that 3rd bedroom is not considered fit to be counted as a bedroom. Such things as that. Anyway, it's about standards of housing in terms of size, I guess.
Councillor Mackay, that is exactly one of the points that was particularly raised by Councillor Springett, minimum room sizes, that sort of thing. And I would be particularly disappointed if the council is to spend this sort of money on a document and it didn't have those standards. But Phil, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, we'll pick all those things up with the consultants, and obviously that's where we've got to be careful here, is that those minimum standards are the things that can change as a result of national legislation. But also, if we go down that route, we've got to make sure that the consultant can give us an evidence base that's defensible to say this is why Maidstone thinks that it needs to be different from national standards. But those are the things that we will explore with the consultant at the outset, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you very much. Councillor Mumford.
Yeah, I really welcome you open this out to everybody and his auntie. Just one technical question really for the planners. Things like car parking, biodiversity net gain, room sizes, can these be written so we end up usurping and putting in higher standards than KCC, DEFRA and government?
We can look to increase or to augment national standards or local standards, but we've got to be absolutely convinced that we can put an evidence base there that will make an inspector say, yes, Maidstone, you're entitled to do this, because the DPD will have to go through that process. So we'd certainly only look to include the matters that we're confident that we can do that on. There are also other ways of, if we take car parking as the case in point, so the KCC standard is 2 spaces per dwelling. It might not be that we have to go to 4 spaces or 3 spaces per dwelling, but actually if we stipulate better carriageway widths to cater for overspill parking without blocking access and egress for residents and other vehicles, that there would sort of, to use the phrase, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So we want to explore all of those things.
Thank you very much. Rob Jarman.
Yeah, I'd just like to add to what Mr. Coyne has said. I think Councillor Munford knows that the sort of national percentage standard, or the default standard as the government call it, for net biodiversity gain is 10%. And I know Kent-wide, we're looking at 20%, but as Mr. Coyne said, obviously there's going to be a viability assessment behind that as part of the evidence base. But being positive, it's a matter of priorities as well. Maidstone Council might prioritise biodiversity improvement more than other things. So there's choices to be made in terms of prioritisation. Thanks.
Thank you, and I think it's worth adding that those priorities should be set by the members, and that's precisely why I propose that we hold the member workshops at an early stage. Councillor Garton.
Yes, we need a DPD urgently, very urgently. So I'm all in favour of that. I just would like to flag up 2 words of concern. The one is consultant and the other one is £140,000. What sort of value for money do we get from consultants? And will there be some sort of like a safeguard in the process that we can overview the spending and the actual results, what is coming from the consultants? Because we can throw a lot of money at consultants and get very little return, or we can overview it at regular intervals and hopefully get some quality document at the end of the day.
Of course, and that's obviously why we're putting a brief out at this stage. But Phil, if you want to come back on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we do think, Councillor Garton, that to use a consultant for this piece of work is a good route, not only because of the amount of work that is currently ongoing in the spatial planning team, but if we prepare this, then we will be going out to bring together bits of the evidence base from various sub-consultants. But if we can appoint somebody that's got the necessary disciplines in-house, we think there will be savings to be achieved on that. In terms of the management of the funding at that point, then before we let the contract, we will want very, very strictly to have set out what we will be getting for our money, what the process will be, the number of meetings that the consultants will, I'd want the consultants to come to the workshop with members So we will have that very, very clearly stipulated at the outset.
Thank you very much. Nobody else is indicating to speak. I did put a proposal on the table which nobody has seconded. Thank you very much. I think Councillor Mackay, you got there just before me. So just to confirm for the minutes, my proposal was that there would be a member workshop for members of the Planning Committee and indeed all members of Council before we press ahead. Phil, did you want to say?
If I may, Chair, I would suggest probably we need to run some as we progress the project as well to make sure that members are comfortable with the direction it's going.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that only strengthens it, so I'm happy to add that to the proposal if you're still happy to second. Fine. Well, thank you very much. There is a recommendation on page 111 of the report agenda pack, which is that the committee authorises officers to procure and contract for the preparation of a design and sustainability development plan document to be adopted as part of the development plan. And then in addition to that, the proposal which I've just made, which is seconded by Councillor Mackay. All of those in favour, raise your hand, please. I'm pretty confident that's unanimous. Is anyone against that? And did anyone abstain? In that case, that was carried unanimously. Thank you very much, members. That concludes the business for tonight. I therefore declare that the meeting is closed.